It is, as I put the finishing touches on this latest, a cold, rainy, gloomy, miserable late afternoon in central Oklahoma. Just the right kind of day for a B minor string quartet by Joseph Haydn. It'll be tomorrow before I post it, however, by which time the sun will be shining warmly in this part of the country, as radiant as the B major ending of the final movement. All the right things do seem to line up. Haydn had written a B minor quartet almost a decade earlier. It appears first in his Opus 33 set. By the way, I misspoke myself in my introduction to that quartet. I indicated at the time that B minor was a rare key for Haydn and for the string quartet genre as a whole, with Opus 33 number 1 seeming to occupy a unique position. That wasn't correct, of course. This Opus 64 quartet is another B minor quartet, one of two that Haydn composed. In my defense, if that's even what it is, I'll say only that I'm much more nearly a music theorist than a music historian, and I'm not exactly a music theorist either. I do make mistakes, catching them only after I've published the fruit of hours and hours of loving labor, and kick myself repeatedly for not proofreading my work more carefully. That fact about me is one of the things that makes me fairly sympathetic when I read and evaluate my students' final projects. And if, heaven forfend, you happen to be a doctoral candidate who's using this series to brush up for your comprehensives, do go to the trouble of checking my work. The B minor quartet at hand actually tracks very closely with Opus 33 number 1, with the opening movement, for instance, appearing to begin in D major in both instances before settling into the tonic key. Although the inner movements are in a different order, the minuet movement of Opus 64 number 2 runs closely parallel with that of Opus 33 number 1, including their luminous parallel major trios. And the final movements of both mind Haydn's favored gypsy vein. There are also important differences. The work at hand, like the F minor quartet that is Opus 55 number 2, charts the gradual ascendancy of the parallel major mode over the minor. Opus 33 number 1, Haydn's earlier B minor quartet, ended solidly and implacably in B minor. Here we have a trajectory from darkness to light with a brilliant B major finish. As I think I've made plain earlier, I always do my analytical work on these pieces before I consult other commentators to see what I've missed or to learn of an alternative way of understanding a work structurally compared to the conclusions I've drawn. I often encounter some real poetry in the process, and in the present case, the program notes of Misha Amory for the Brentano Quartet and Richard Wigmore for Hyperion Records would really be worth your time. I'll link you to both in the description below. Everything I will tell you has been much better said by those commentators whose prose far transcends the pedestrian structural descriptions that I furnish here. That said, here's a brief rundown of the quartet's four movements. Movement 1 is a mostly severe-sounding sonata form essay in the tonic key with a secondary thematic area in D major, as we'd expect, and with the exposition repeated. One of the most arresting moments in this movement is a sudden plunge into D minor during the second group, a Sturm und Drang outburst that borders on the terrifying. The development is about as determined sounding as any you can hope to hear, and the recap includes a kind of new theme interrupted by silences, a haunting sounding approach that will also be evident during the final movement's development. The second movement is a radiant hymn-like outpouring in the parallel major, a variation form movement with a thema in two repeated strains, but whose first statement is itself a double variation. Perhaps you'll see what I mean when we get there. I know of no more quietly rapturous music than this. I can't imagine ever growing tired of hearing it. This movement is the first stage of that journey from darkness to light, with the major modalities set to return in the context of the B minor minuet, whose B major Landler-style trio points us again in that more optimistic sounding direction. The trajectory is completed during the finale, whose single gypsy-flavored theme in contradance phrasing provides the fodder for an amazing development section, whose halting progress is continually broken by unnerving silences, and whose second recapitulation, first theme and all, is flung joyously forth in B major. The movement doesn't exactly end in celebration, however. If you're as unfamiliar with this beautiful work as I was when I began this project 4 days ago, I'm not about to spoil the ending for you. The Kodály Quartet is responsible for this recording, which may be found on the Naxos label.
you.